was an interesting time for comics. I say that a lot, but it's true. The comic book industry in the 1980s experienced many things. Marvel was bought by Ron Perlman, who was a corporate raider, and in the process of being sold, Marvel made itself business-wise more appealing to buyers, and in doing so, sold out most of its integrity for publishing. Like, they were trying to get rid of people's coverage, people's plans, people's everything that they were building up to. The things that were making Marvel a great place to work, they were getting rid of. And Jim Shooter eventually gets fired from the company and replaced with Tom DeFalco, and Ron Perlman buys Marvel. DC Comics has probably their best decade since 1940, because DC Comics is one of the biggest benefiters of the British invasion. British invasion was not Paul Revere shouting, "The regulars are coming, the regulars are coming." It was Alan Moore taking over Swamp Thing and bringing V for Vendetta with him. It was Neil Gaiman taking over Sandman in the late 80s, early 90s. It was this group of guys that were just so good, like Brian Bolland drew Killing Joke with Alan Moore in the late 80s. Just so many good guys that came over. Jamie Delano took over Hellblazer, which was a creation of Alan Moore and
Steve Bissett and John Tottleton
that they made to look like Sting, but it was really John Constantine, who they really wanted to call the title
Hellraiser.
But Clive Barker had already taken the name. Is the year comics grew up. Like, anything that was adolescent beforehand was now mature, because you have these works like Art Spiegelman's Moss, you have Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, you have Watchmen, brought to you by Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore, you have Mark Grunwald's Squadron Supreme, which, by the way, has fallen out of favor in recent years. However, it does signify stories on Marvel's part to tell deeper stories. Like, superheroes that couldn't superheroes couldn't tackle. Like, these are the smartest people in the world, supposedly, and they haven't tackled why they can't cure cancer yet. And Squadron Supreme was also interesting because Mark Grunwald did not work for DC Comics. However, he got to write the Justice League of America. He did it through an analog of the Justice League called Squadron Supreme, which everybody in the team was analogous to DC Comics' Justice League of America. It's interesting the way companies manage to do nods to other characters, but while still being themselves. There's going to be a future episode where I just track down all the stories that comics companies have done that use characters that are mock-ups of other companies' characters. DC brought about Watchmen because they had acquired the Charlton superheroes. The Charlton superheroes were guys like Blue Beetle, Captain Atom. They were these characters that were new to the DC universe. They were very bent on integrating them into the universe around them. However, the story that Alan Moore submitted to editor Len Wein was a little bit too dark for the characters, so Alan Moore changed the characters around. Blue Beetle becomes Rorschach, who is also an amalgam of Steve Ditko's characters, Mr. A, and a little bit of Steve Ditko himself. The Incredible Thinking Man becomes Ozymandias. Captain Atom was turned into Dr. Manhattan. Dr. Manhattan was the only superhero in the comic with powers, and it was explained why he had powers and why he was the only one. The book deconstructed every superhero trope. Like, it explained how they got their powers. It explains their origin. It explains their relationship with their villains. And it explains it in a way that it's realistic, but very gritty, very dark. And it puts things into real life context. Dark Knight Returns, on the other hand, took the political climate of the 80s and it made Batman a part of it. The social climate, the political climate, it had Batman, who is old, which is new, by the way. I'd never seen or heard of characters being as old as they were in that book. It's like an old Batman. Frank Miller told the story one time that he was having a birthday coming up, and he thought to himself, there is no way I am getting older than Bruce Wayne. So Frank Miller writes a story where Bruce Wayne is in his 60s or late 50s or something. It's 20 years after the second Robin dies, and he just comes back down out of the manor and all that, and becomes Batman once again, and he just tears apart the city like it was nothing new. And it shows the Joker coming out of a catatonic state on the word Batman and just smiling. And it was a very good book. The one I was talking about before, Moss, the first one I mentioned that one first because that one proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that comics can be art. Even though all the books I just mentioned were very good books, and they are credited as getting people back into comics, Moss has a special place in history for the fact that it became a media sensation. Moss is the story of Art Spiegelman's father and mother in the Jewish concentration camps and their escape from it. And the second volume deals with that, as well as his life around the first book, and it deals with his relationship to his father. It was an extremely personal work, and the style he used was not realistic. It was more, I don't even know the word for it. He used mice for Jews, cats for Germans, and he put these masks on the actual people to show what their role in the situation really was, and it worked so very well because it's a very powerful story that hits you very hard. And if I ever come across someone who says that superheroes are garbage, comics are garbage, at the second phrase, comics are garbage, that's where I point them to. That's when I say, this is not a funny book. In the 80s, with the British invasion, with Watchmen, with 1985, the year comics grew up, you have also one of the biggest moments in comics history, Batman the movie. Gone was the 1960s campy version of it. Batman was dark. He was psychopathic. Jack Nicholson's the Joker. He's crazier, and it's directed by Tim Burton and stars Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, Kim Basinger, and it is good. Like, it proves outright that comics can be done this way. Anton Furst's production design on the sets on Gotham, was just a revolution in itself, because beforehand, in the '66 Batman movie, he uses a batarang with a rope on it to throw up the building and walk himself this way up the building while the camera's sideways, so it looks like he's walking up the building. Tim Burton's Batman pulls out a grappling gun, fires, lifts himself up into the air, and descends upon these criminals with all black suit, blackened eyes and all that stuff, so he looks really intimidating at night, and just beats people up. It was probably one of the most perfect moments in the 80s. Ladies and gentlemen, the fall of DC Comics. DC Comics in the 80s was doing incredibly well. They had Frank Miller and Alan Moore working for them, and those books were selling inordinate amounts of copies. They were fan favorites, and they would sell. DC Comics, however, proposed a rating system. They didn't actually come out with a rating system, they proposed a rating system. And this rating system ticked off so many creators. Howard Chaykin, Frank Miller, Alan Moore, so many. And it became a very public dispute, because several of the creators went onto a radio show hosted by Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison is one of the most influential people because he's one of the best writers, and he's also a fan of comic books. And he's on radio and whatnot. He's a very popular sci-fi author, and these guys go on this show, and a dispute happens because now DC Comics is looking bad in public. What you eventually see is a breakdown of editorial and a large number of fan favorite and superstar artists and writers walking away from DC Comics. Marvel Comics worker basically says, "This is the first time in 20 years DC is beating us, and they shoot themselves in the foot like this." Well, they did.